Hi. For the purpose of today's video, I would like to discuss a recent match between Crelinsten and Deandre Corbe. This happened at a Who's Number 1 event, and I will link this match in the description so that you might be able to watch along. Now, this match was a great contest, and Deandre Corbe came on very strong with all of his wrestling tactics. Crelinsten held his own in the wrestling too, but it was a really explosive single leg that led to Deandre Corbe getting into a great leg entanglement on Crelinsten could really handle his own in the wrestling department too, but it was like an explosive single leg attempt from Deandre Corbe that ended him in a really nice leg entanglement, where he had both of Crelinsten's legs in his configuration. For those who don't know, our leg entanglement is where we are using our legs to isolate our opponents. And because they are isolated, we can form attacks on them. A common strategy of defending ourselves from this position is to clear what's known as our knee line. And our knee line is the point at which their hips and our knees kind of intersect. So I want to clear my knee outside of my opponent's hip line. So I want to clear my knees outside of this danger area. For a great portion of the match, Deandre Corbe was able to keep this isolation on his opponent, and he had really nice attacks from here. Ultimately though, Crelinsten was able to get out and work his way to a dominant side control. But before that happened, he was able to stand and impose pressure on Deandre Corbe from like a half guard situation where he was just looming over his opponent and making him carry his weight. When Crelinsten passed and got his legs out of here, the position he kind of ended up in was one I was unfamiliar with until very recently, when I looked at Craig Jones's Power Ride system, of which I'd highly recommend. This position he ended up in is called dope mount, and apparently it's something that BJ Penn would use, although I've never seen it before. But the way he had his legs configured, and it's similar to a leg drag, except on an opposite side. But in this dope mount, Crelinsten was able to create great pressure on Deandre Corbe, especially with his underhook on the head. Because of this position and how Crelinsten could both manipulate his opponent's hips as well as his head and neck, Deandre Corbe was unable to breathe very effectively. Unfortunately, Crelinsten couldn't hold this position for very long, because the ref almost immediately was calling for action. In my opinion, he could have cooked him here a bit longer, and I disagree with that kind of call. After the ref warned Crelinsten for stalling when he had this dope mount configuration, he then went to a standard mount, except instead of having his legs at his opponent's sides, he worked in a body triangle and had the top position where Deandre Corbe was more on his rib cage than flat on his back. This was cool, and also, like, everyone knows what's going on, so he's in no more danger of being called for stalling, which is a plus. And this was great, but the one drawback of this position is that his legs are locked into place. He's imposing immense pressure into Deandre Corbe's core because with this body lock, which is kind of like a triangle, if you're unfamiliar, it's kind of like a triangle but around your opponent's waist. And you can apply immense pressure into their midsection, which isn't very good if they want to breathe. So, from this position, his legs are locked into place. So his main thing is to look for submissions using just his arms. Now, what's neat about this is the method he elected to do it, which is one I really like. Ethan Crelinsten decided to go for a series of muffler attempts. Now, if you're unfamiliar with a muffler, it's where you take your hand and you post it, you cup over your opponent's mouth and nose, just like this. That is very restrictive to breathing. And when they respond, they have to address it. They can't let their opponent just sit there with a muffler because eventually they're going to run out of air, which is very awesome as a smother. And also, it should be said that Ethan Crelinsten was rotating this muffler with your more of your shoulder and chest kind of smother variants as well. So when his opponent reacts to this muffler, and which is what I found as well, is that they want to take the grip off, right? When they take the grip off, say there was a hand here. When I take this off and I shoot my arm into the air, just like this, it can open up for my opponent to have a katagatame, or what you might know as an arm triangle, where we configure our arms and go against our opponent's neck, but also have an arm locked in too for a greater means of control. Now, it was incredibly neat to see this, and it really put Deandre Corbe in a tough spot because he has to use his two arms to negate Ethan Crelinsten's two arms, but in the meantime, he's unable to breathe effectively due to the body lock he's been placed in. So he is in a lose-lose situation and has to address various things of Crelinsten's, but he has no ability to impose any threats of his own. He's in a purely defensive place. Now, the last thing I would like to talk about is what I found the most fascinating. Well, you'll have matches where you'll see people use mufflers, and I think that everyone should if the competition allows them to do it. The muffler is a fantastic means of depleting an opponent, but also setting up submission attempts because your opponent is forced to respond. And if they're not used to this method of attack, because the muffler itself has had way more of a history in mixed martial arts than it has in jiu-jitsu. It's been used in mixed martial arts from the beginning. Everyone recognized its potential. But your jiu-jitsu guy might not be as up to date on it or be thinking about it as frequently, and they could respond in ways that leave them more vulnerable than they're accustomed to. It could set them up for future attacks. But what again I'm trying to get at is that the most fascinating point of this match was the back take scenarios from Ethan Crelinsten. What I loved here is that every time Ethan Crelinsten would do what we call a chair sit back take, which is where we fall backwards with our opponent and insert our hooks. So our opponent is on top of us. This is different than a climbing back take, where we are on top of our opponent, climbing up their back and inserting our hips. No, inserting our hooks, I mean. It's different than that because the positions are skewed. Either my opponent's on top of me because I did a chair sit back take, or I'm on top of my opponent because I did that climbing back take. Now, what I loved about the positions where he would pull his opponent on top of him as a means to take his back was that he would do this for the purposes of attacking submissions. When Ethan Crelinsten pulled him on top, he would immediately take advantage of the fact that he had his opponent in the air, and then he could more easily access his neck, access his arms, and for isolation attempts. He took advantage of the position where he controls all of his opponent's weight, and he can get under things way easier than if he's on top. The thing that makes this cool is that with a lot of people, when they get their opponent on top of them and have the hooks in from this chair sit back take again, they can sit there and just attack submission holds the whole time. And it's a totally dominant position, don't get me wrong. And they are making use of the nature of it being that you can more easily pursue submission holds, but what they're missing out on is the pressure. Besides from having my opponent on top of me and being able to insert like a body lock, then I can impose a bit of pressure, but still I will not be able to impose as much pressure as if I was on the top position. So instead of this, of holding Deandre Corbe on top of him, looking for submissions or just holding into a body lock, which is kind of this more standard way of doing things, Ethan would quickly pursue a submission attempt. If it wasn't there, he would turn him right back over, and then have his back but be in the top position. This is wonderful because when I have the top position, I'm on top of my opponent, I have gravity on my side, I'm looming over my opponent, and all of the pressure is going more into him. It's not as great a position to pursue submissions because he has the ground that kind of gets in the way. But when it comes to pressure, it's way more powerful to be on top of the person than have them on top of us. And I loved the difference between the two, how it would take advantages of the strengths and weaknesses of both aspects of back take, whether we're on top or whether we're on the bottom. This point about the back was really why I wanted to make this video, and I feel like this match deserves a watch for the reason of these back positions. And if you do happen to watch the match, please be sure to let me know what you think of it and what your takeaways from this match were. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. And also, again, I will leave the match in the description. But we'll see you next time, and take care.